Here we go, Chair, ready when you are.
We'll try again. May I welcome members and officers to the hybrid meeting of the Education Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is able to be viewed live by members of the press and public today. Therefore, may I welcome anyone that may be watching remotely. A recording of this meeting will be made available on the Council's webcasting and YouTube channels after the meeting is concluded, should anyone else wish to view it. Please be aware that this meeting is being transcribed only for the purpose of producing the minutes. The transcript will be deleted once the committee approves the minutes, and it should not be downloaded by anyone other than Democratic Services. To confirm, as a council, we welcome the use of the Welsh language within our public meetings, but I can confirm that I have not received any notifications or requests to use Welsh today. Therefore, the meeting will be conducted in English only. May I remind members to refrain from using the chat facility and instead use the raised hand icon to indicate when you wish to speak. Please could you also keep your microphone muted when not talking so that there are no interruptions encountered. May I also remind members that as per the statutory guidance made under Section 4 of the Local Government Wales Measure 2011 and our formally adopted hybrid meeting policy, any member attending the meeting remotely must be able to be seen and heard by members and officers who are attending the meeting, as well as by members of the public viewing the meeting. So can I ask that you all please use your cameras for the duration of the meeting. Moving on to the agenda, could Jade, our Democratic Services Officer, confirm if we have received any apologies, please?
Thanks, Chair. We've had apologies from Councillor Janet Jones this morning.
Thank you, Jade. Are there any other apologies that anyone knows of? Could I ask members in alphabetical order to state whether they have any declarations of interest then, please? Councillor Best? Not here. Councillor Cowles.
Sorry, Chair. Governor at Blenavon Heritage School, Governor of Aberystwyth School, and I have a brother at Aberystwyth School as well.
John Kennett. Victoria Hawler.
Parent Governor Yscol Panteg.
Thank you. Councillor Mark Jones.
None for me.
Councillor Keats.
Nothing apart from a grandchild in Crossy-Ceiliog. That's it.
Myself, I'm on the Management Committee of the Pupil Referral Unit, and I have great-grandchildren in Blenheim Road and Coediva Federated Schools, and one in YGG. Councillor Simons, not here. Councillor Thomas. Colette Thomas.
I have a grandchild at Cwmbran High School and McGivern at Nant Celyn School.
And Councillor Watkins.
The Governor at Our Lady of the Angels Roman Catholic Primary School and Cwmbran High School.
Thank you for that, members. Agenda item 3 are the minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of July 2025. Seems a long time ago now. Just to remind members, these minutes relate to the update report that we received on the progress and impact of accepted recommendations and the progress against adopted action plans. Members, do you approve these minutes as an accurate record? Thank you. Agenda item 4 is the action sheet. Please could members confirm if they have any questions or whether they are happy to note the action sheet. You're happy to note it? Thank you. That takes us to the substantial item, agenda item 5, the additional learning needs transformation. How will the local authorities' policies improve outcomes for learners? The purpose of this report is to provide an overview of the provision for learners with ALN in Torfaen. It provides information in order to support the consideration of the extent to which the Council's ALN policies and support arrangements are helping to improve outcomes for Torfaen learners. The report outlines policy, practice and provision in relation to ALN and focuses specifically on key developments which have taken place since September 2024 in order to further strengthen the leadership of ALN and service delivery. Before we commence discussions, I would like to welcome the executive member and officers to the meeting, and could we quickly go around the table for everyone to introduce themselves, please? Andrew.
Morning everyone, Andrew Powell's Director of Education. Our colleagues will introduce themselves, but just as a quick overview, we've had significant changes in the last year within the department. So Claire started a year ago as Head of Service, and Fiona started with us in September as ALM Manager. We've also just appointed 2 new inclusive practice advisors. One started about a week ago, and one is due to start in January.
Wow. So I'm Claire Williams, Head of ALN Inclusion and Wellbeing.
I'm Fiona Colcom, ALM Wellbeing Inclusion Advisor.
And online? Councillor Clark.
I'm Councillor Richard Clark, Executive Member of Children, Families and Educations, and if I need to declare anything, I am a Governor at St David's Roman Catholic Primary School.
Thank you, Richard. Jason?
Good morning, members. Jason O'Brien, Strategic Director for Children and Family Services.
Thank you and welcome all. On behalf of the committee, may I thank the head teacher and staff and pupils across the Killock School for our very informative recent visit, which has proved really useful in preparing for today's meeting. Members have all read the report, and so we will head straight into the questions, unless anyone would like to make any introductory comments beforehand. Richard, do you want to make any introduction? No. Jason? Any introductory comments? No.
No, thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We'll go straight into the questions then. So question 1 is Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to paragraph 3.2. Under the ALN Code for Wales, local authorities have statutory duties to oversee and ensure the provision of and support for children and young people aged 0 to 25 with additional learning needs. Could you please outline what post-16 provision and support we have in place?
I think first thing I'd like to recognise is this is an area for development for us as a team. And that, one of the reasons for appointing an inclusive practice advisor for secondary and post-16 is in recognition of that, because the responsibilities on local authorities are relatively new to everybody, so it's an area that I think we are still trying to develop. So our ALN manager, Tracy Tucker, she is the person that would oversee the links between settings pre-16 and post-16. So where those needs are identified, that transition can be planned for really, really smoothly. Fiona and her team will also have a role to start to play in that now as those arrangements firm up, if you like. So Tracy, the ALN manager, sits on a national group and an EOTIS advisory group as well, a working group with Welsh Government, so that we're having those regular updates on post-16 provisions. So MEDA, for example, is an organisation that Tracy goes to meetings and attends those regularly. And we also are part of things like the post-16 learning partnership with Torfaen Learning Zone and the curriculum planning meeting. So there's one tomorrow, for example, which I attend. So we can try to make sure that there's clear communication and clear transition pathways for pupils from, school settings into post-16 settings. I don't know if you want to say.
Yeah, so in terms of the provision that we actually have, Gwynflew is our only sixth form, so they will have support for their learners which are in mainstream but attending sixth form. We work closely with Coleg Gwent, as Clara said, in Torfaen Learning Zone, and their other settings, and they have specialist provision for ALN learners. And so we've started to talk about where actually that pathway might be more appropriate for learners, even if they're of statutory school age, and how we can support them into those provisions where it's appropriate. There's also the commissioning of independent specialist post-16 providers. So previously that funding has been managed by Welsh Government, but this is transferring into local authorities. So that is partly why we want to, well, why we have increased the capacity within the department. There's a risk associated with that, in that the methodology for transferring money to local authorities is still being worked through, and the costs could be much more significant than the funding allocated from Welsh Government. It's really early days with this. The policy is literally just being implemented, so it's something we need to be really mindful of and potential risks to our financial planning.
I've got a supplementary. How do we manage with the up to 25? So obviously, you know, that is a difficult way to manage it if they've left Coleg Gwent or what have you. So.
Yes, so IDPs do run up to 25, so we've got a statutory duty to monitor those and ensure that the provision is correct for the learners. It is new to have it up to 25, so this is something we are working through as the legislation is working through. I should also say Cranbridge does operate up to 19, so that's another local provision we've got. But it's new. Like I said, the transfer to local authorities, the funding is new. The responsibility is still relatively new, and it involves working closely with social care, both children and adult services, to making sure that we're operating in concert and that we're clearly considering both the housing, the social and the education needs of learners.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay. Councillor Cowles, question 2.
Thank you, Chair. The report confirms that if a child or young person or their parent is unhappy with the school's decision about ALN, they can request that the LA reconsiders that decision. Are all parents informed of this route, and is that the only right to appeal, or can they take it further following reconsideration?
Yeah, I would say systems and process schools are very much aware of the procedures to follow that through, and via any sort of dispute and resolution meetings, parents will be made aware of that. The local authority have provided leaflets and guidance, and obviously advocate the support of external agencies such as Snap Cymru as well, and very much promote the partnership working with that in schools as well.
And in terms of other, because I think you asked about other routes of appeal, so if a parent were to ask the local authority to reconsider a decision, parents are also informed of their rights to appeal to the Education Tribunal Wales. That's something that we put on all of our outcome letters, so that we make them clearly aware of that route as well.
Quick supplementary. Obviously, if that appeal happens to the Educational Tribunal, is there legal aid for that, or would the parent have to pay for that, and would the local authority have to pay for representation at that tribunal?
In terms of, I don't know specifically about legal aid for parents for Education Tribunal Wales. I'd have to check that, fact check that. Snap Cymru advice is obviously, because that's an advocacy service, that wouldn't cost parents anything. But in my limited experience of Educational Tribunal Wales, normally that is usually the parent and a local authority representative working together. It's very unusual that it becomes adversarial and you know, it's seen as a litigation arena. So, for example, the local authority would very rarely take legal representation to that arena. It would be the ALN manager.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah. Councillor Thomas, question 3.
My question is just leading on from that. How many requests has the LA received in recent years to reconsider school decisions about ALN and tribunals?
Yeah, since ALN implementation, there have been 6.
Councillor Mark Jones, your next question, question 4.
Yeah, hi, good morning. This is relevant to paragraph 3.17. How effective is the joint working with health to identify ALN needs early, and how confident are we that children are not being missed, please?
So we have a regular link with the DECLO for the region. I'm trying to remember what the acronym means. The Designated Education Lead, essentially, for health and education is the DECLO. So she attends, for example, SUC inclusion meetings. So the South East Wales region have a group of heads of service, myself and other local authorities, and the DECLO will attend those meetings so that they can understand and pick up on regional issues. and also the DECLO has attended our ALNCO forum, for example. So that liaison is important because that gives us an opportunity to raise issues to the DECLO if we think that there are chances that things are being missed. So an example I think I brought to this committee before is where our ASD officer was receiving timely information on rates of diagnosis for children over 5, under 5, but the over 5s, she wasn't getting that timely information. We raised that with the DECLO and that was addressed, and that information started coming through in a timely way. So we do have notifications from health, and I would say, working with our regional colleagues, that seems to be working quite well across our region where those early years notifications are coming through, so children are not slipping through that net. There's very few surprises in terms of children with health needs coming through from an early years perspective. But I think one of the things that we continue to liaise with health around is sort of the rise in intimate care needs and medical procedures, for want of a better way of putting it, in schools, and continuing to highlight the challenge that that poses for schools sometimes in being able to manage those needs, because those needs seem to be increasing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Claire. Jason, I understand you're having trouble with your raise the hand icon. Please shout out if you need to speak. Do you have any comment on the previous questions?
Not on that one, Chair, but the one prior to that regarding legal aid. As I understand it, legal aid is available for preparation of cases for ALN tribunals, but isn't then available unless there's special circumstances for the actual tribunal or actual hearing themselves.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Question 5 is Councillor Jane Watkins.
Thank you. Moving on to paragraph 4.1. With regards to the EAS teaching and learning strategy and sharing best practice around ALM, is the cluster work effective in this area in order to ensure consistency around the transition from primary to secondary?
Yeah, so the local authority really advocate that clusters do work closely together. I think transition work continues to improve. I think our schools are very reflective and in terms of how to support learners moving forward in transition. The teaching and learning strategy and ALN, the idea of that is that they're not different, and that actually excellent quality teaching and learning should meet the needs of many of our ALN learners through the different strategies and approaches. And we're continuing as a local authority to sort of promote those links and that understanding about what provision is offered in primary and secondary, to make sure there's that clear understanding through transition of, I suppose, support that a child may have been having in a primary education and what that may look like in secondary education. So we've agended that to be discussed throughout this year in our ALNCO forums to really make sure that's transparency of that understanding at primary and secondary, and how that may differ slightly, but only to strengthen and improve those links.
This is a really important issue for us. So this term we've commissioned the LA School Improvement Service to review how each cluster is preparing for transition. What are their cluster plans for transition of learners? This is part of the middle tier review that took place, the expectation of horizontal and vertical working. So we're due that report early in the spring term. That's something we can share with them. Choose the focus they want based on their individual priorities. So we're expecting it to largely be about reading, maths, numeracy. But there's that discrete focus of each cluster. And again, that report will be ready at the beginning of the summer. So again, we can share that with members.
Just to give you a specific example, at our next ALNCO forum next week, one of the activities, we always do activities where we get ALNCOs to work in clusters. So one of the activities we have planned is for them to bring individually their provision map for their setting, which they can then compare with other schools in the cluster, and the primaries compared to the secondary school. Because one of the things we're picking up through our professional learning is where what schools are classing as universal provision, or provision made generally available in the primary school, will and should look different as those children transition to secondary school, and we want to support ALNCOs to have, I guess, more of a common understanding of what provision generally made available looks like across Torfaen, and the aim being that we get towards, you know, an inclusive practice, sort of exemplified toolkit eventually, and that recognition that it will change and look different, so that we can manage parental expectation and schools' expectation about what's possible.
Claire is leading on this on behalf of Welsh Government. So Claire and the Head of Inclusion from the Vale of Glamorgan are leading this working group looking at a universal provision across Wales. There's 3 working groups based on the paper that the Cabinet Secretary put out in the autumn about the implementation of ALN legislation and the recognition that there's work to do. So we're really fortunate. Claire was asked to do this on behalf of Welsh Government because there's a recognition of her skills in teaching and learning and leadership of schools. So we're in a really fortunate position here. We're directing some of this national work. But she's shy and she won't tell you that.
Yeah, no supplementary tax. Obviously, that was a lot of information, but I think as a committee, we think this is definitely an area where the cluster work is going to be so important. It's going to be absolutely crucial, yeah. So it's good to know that we're monitoring it, and obviously we're going to keep an eye on it. Thank you.
Thank you. Question 7. Oh, so question 6, sorry, yeah, I offered it to you and then we went off on the other.
Thank you. Yeah, moving on to paragraph 4.3. Can you supply an overview of the work that's going to be covered by the new inclusive practice advisors, please?
Yeah, okay, sorry. So obviously I started in September, and I've already done a lot of work linking in with schools. So I suppose the thing is in the name about the advisory role. So I have come from a primary school, and my background is leading an LRB as well. So I've got sort of both hats there. So sharing that practice, supporting schools to develop provision, problem solving, really kind of the teaching and learning and ALN, the link between those two. And then the role of our new advisors, so we've got 1 primary advisor and 1 secondary and post-16 advisor, that we're foreseeing that their role might not particularly always be supporting with ALN, but actually the pre-ALN, is perhaps there are emerging needs, and really looking at what that inclusive practice looks like, and providing tools and strategies to support that. Claire already mentioned we're looking to, through our work, devise an inclusive toolkit, which will sort of be a go-to for schools. But really, we're wanting our roles to be very present and very visible in schools, particularly our secondary advisor. Obviously, there's 6 secondary schools in the PRU, seeing that he will be very present in our secondary schools to be able to offer that support and advisory. So we won't be in the position of kind of making set reports, and for want of a better phrase, it will be more of an informal level of working, because obviously there's other professionals who do that, such as our educational psychologists, and also then providing the support to give a bit of flexibility for other services. So we know that outreach their capacity is huge, and the caseloads they have. So hoping that the inclusive roles can kind of take some of that before it reaches that level. And similarly for our ISD support officer as well, that she has a very large caseload. So again, supporting some of those needs that are coming through prior to them meeting her need.
This morning, Fiona and I were speaking. So this morning, Fiona and I were speaking about some of the work that's already taken place. We talked about primary school, where Fiona's gone in to discuss about better allocation of staff time and staff resources, about how effectively to resource and nurture base and to support learners that require one-to-one. So that's something I guess, practical example of the kind of work that we see these staff doing. I don't know if there's any other examples.
Yeah, so another practical example, obviously I've only been in post weeks still, I'm still saying weeks, not months yet. But I've been into a secondary school, into one LRB, looking again about sort of environmental need and staffing, and just sometimes it's that fresh pair of eyes coming in and kind of just problem solving and working through things. And yeah, so it's sometimes things have already been trialled and tested, but there's oftentimes, and you know, have been going into schools and having conversations, and recommendations have been able to be provided, and consideration points. Because sometimes if you're in it and you're working in it, you just can't see things all the time. So yeah, just looking at perhaps alterations in funding, in the environment, in the provision, drawing on lots of our primary schools are have got their own nurture provisions, so drawing upon my experience in LRB and how that can look, and the teaching and learning, and how that can look for assessment and so on as well.
And in terms of some sort of specific work streams then, if you think about their roles almost like as triage, because we've got our statutory team, we've got our educational psychology team, we have outreach, and at the moment those referrals are almost sort of going straight to the ends of the extremes, and this is the bridge between the two. So it's that triage approach of actually, have we followed a graduated response all the way to the end? Is there something else we could have tried or done, using the benefit of their experience and expertise, but leading some specific work streams like picking up the IBIS, the improving behaviour in schools, and those people now running that, because they're the closest to the practitioners in the schools. The Autism in Education Trust becoming one of our professional learning trainers for that particular professional learning programme. So when we're rolling out that training en masse to schools, there may be some schools that couldn't or wouldn't, or weren't able to take part at this particular time. They can then go out into those schools and offer that professional learning and advice, because they're fresh out of schools and practice themselves. And then when referrals are getting to outreach, we can be more assured, if you like, that we've done everything we can up until that point, so that outreach are receiving the referrals that need the most attention in that moment. So it's a bit of a triage, and also moving forward, we'd like to use our ALN grant funding to develop an ALN helpline using the expertise of staff in specialist settings, where those inclusive practice advisors can oversee that, where schools can, if you like, book an appointment to just problem solve and triage and talk things through. Sometimes that's what schools need. They need an ear at the end of the phone to say, we've tried this. Have you got any other suggestions or schools that we could go and visit to see good practice in?
Just, I suppose, in a sort of one sentence, that the role of the advisors will be to support the school in their graduated response to perhaps identifying and supporting ALN, so that's where we will fit. And also there's going to be a large part of professional learning as well that the advisors and myself will provide, whether it be to cohorts and all of our ALN co's, or actually at quite a bespoke level in school. Perhaps there's a training need for a small group of staff in school, or some individuals that will be able to hopefully have the skills and expertise to be able to deliver that as well.
And last thing from me, because it keeps popping into my head, in terms of what these people do, we haven't sat in a room on our own and thought that up. We took it to the ALN Head Teacher Strategy Group back in the summer term and said that we've got the opportunity to have these 2 new posts. What do you want from them? How can they help you? What have we already got? How can we make sure we don't double up and overlap? And we also had a team planning day in the summer term with the education psychology team, the ASD officer, and collectively between us said, right, well, who's doing what and how can we make sure we get the best out of these roles? So we've had that wider consultation as well.
Yeah, just have a supplementary, please. No, it sounds like a very well thought out role. Obviously, a lot of work has gone into putting those positions into the right place. But just broadly, so you've used words like informal and flexible and triage, but how then will you, and you're not going to provide reports and things like that, so how will you know if these roles are a success, that they have been worthwhile roles, if we've appointed 2 of them?
I think through the head teacher survey that we issue, we take feedback from schools as to what they need in terms of support, and one of the things that head teachers have raised in the past is that capacity for ALN support and advice. So that's one way that we can gauge impact through the head teacher survey. I think linked to probably a question that may come up about, demand for specialist provision, for example. We are keeping those numbers under review. There are some examples in the requests that we've seen where we think an inclusive practice advisor probably could have supported that school before that request came to us. So there's things like that that we can monitor. The numbers of referrals, for example, to outreach and the caseload that they're managing. So there's a number of sources of data, but I think it's the relationships with schools and our regular check-in with those and the feedback that we get from them as well. So when Fiona says there won't be formal reporting, what she means is, an education psychologist would come in, observe a child and provide a formal report. That's not their role, but their role might be to refer on to that person if they think that's appropriate at that point.
So ultimately, in terms of our self-evaluation, we've got a number of performance measures we've built into our education improvement plan. We're in the process of writing the plan for 26-27. We've just done extensive evaluation with head teachers, with governors, with Councillor Clark, with officers around the council. It looks like we're going to keep Objective 1 and 2 the same next year. So Objective 1 is about outcomes for all learners, particularly in literacy and numeracy. And Objective 2 is about the effectiveness of specialist and targeted ALM provision. So within there's a number of set performance measures. The feedback we've had so far is those performance measures are appropriate and we are looking to keep them. So it's things like Key Stage 4 outcomes are in line with modelled expectations. Like Claire says, things like incidents of fixed term exclusions, permanent exclusions, keeping a track of modified days, the proportion of expenditure that goes to out-of-county provision as opposed to keeping learners within Torvine. So those are our ultimate measures about, is this effective? So again, that will be part of our annual evaluation, which we'll bring here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. That takes us to question 7, and I'll take this one. And it was a conversation that's come up in a couple of places. So is the LA IDP consideration form consistent across primary and secondary schools within Torvine? And do we encounter any issues across local authorities when pupils transfer from one local authority to another? There seems to be a difference in different forms for different local authorities, and that can be a difficult situation for schools taking that information in. So, something I spoke to Councillor Clark about, yeah.
So in terms of the LA IDP consideration form is consistent across our schools, so that's new for this academic year. So we introduced that from September, and that was consulted on through our ALN Forum and our ALN Head Teacher Strategy Group. In terms of differences between local authorities, what I would say is, whilst paperwork might look different, ultimately the information you need to be able to consider whether a child needs an LA IDP won't differ greatly from one local authority to another, because schools have to evidence that they followed that graduated response. So the sorts of evidence that we're asking for would be things like education psychology reports, outreach reports, the child's IDP. So we shouldn't differ greatly. And also, we've done that knowing what other regions do. So that form is designed to support consistency, and all schools should be using it. But because it's new, one of our actions is to implement, to monitor the implementation of that. And through Specialist Panel, just recently, we will be giving feedback to schools where perhaps that process hasn't been used as well as it might do at the moment.
Question 8 is Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is in relation to 4.12. So members are aware that there is an increased demand for specialist placements, and it's a national issue. Torvine has budgeted for an additional 20 placements this year. Is there a longer-term plan for managing the increased demand for placements?
This will probably be a number of us. Okay, so the inclusive practice advisors that we've talked about, we want to improve mainstream ALN support. The needs of learners have changed, and if that's a real challenge for schools, and don't underestimate it. So we want to support them to adapt their provision within mainstream. Part of that was the reconfiguration of the funding formula that started this year. So the mainstream ALN funding, which is about £5 million, is now based on pupil numbers, a deprivation measure for the school, and the number of learners with IDPs. And that's seen a shift of funding from secondary to primary, quite a considerable amount. We all signed up to that. That was really clear when we were developing the funding formula, so all schools knew this was likely to happen. The view of that is it supports early intervention and prevention work, and we want to address the needs of learners sooner to identify their needs and implement the support. We hope that will stem the need for learners having to access specialist provision out of school or out of county. But it's going to take time, and we need to monitor the impact of it. We've seen further increase in requests for specialist provision this autumn, another significant increase, which if we will assess them in line with the criteria that's being put through, but there's a risk there will be a further pressure of more children identified for specialist placements. Those panels are taking place at the moment. We aim to have it concluded by, I think it's February, isn't it? Yeah. So that's the policy intention, but it's a challenging context.
I think in terms of how we monitoring that, you know, there aren't any surprises in that I've already briefed Councillor Clark on the specialist placement process to date, even though it's not concluded. I've briefed him on where we're at with it, what the demand looks like at the moment, and it's feeding into sort of future forecasting. Also, though, as Andrew said, we've created additional placements. We could go on creating additional placements, but the general sort of level of need is changing, and children are coming into school at in early years presenting with different needs to the needs that they did historically. So I've talked to this committee before about how we have to support schools to adapt and change as well. That's part of why we've got inclusive practice advisors, partly why we want to develop an inclusive practice toolkit. Andrew's mentioned the funding changes. The Autism and Education Trust Professional Learning, we've invested in that because the reality is schools will see an increase in the number of learners with ASD, for example, in their classrooms. And so not all of those children are going to need a specialist provision, but all of those staff in that school will need professional learning to support them to be able to meet those children's needs. So it's just trying to manage those who meet criteria, but also those where we need to upskill the profession.
Talk about deaf learners and the numbers coming through.
Yeah, so things, when I talk about how we're monitoring the numbers, so for example, we've got two resource spaces where we've got deaf resource spaces as well. So what we're seeing is the number of places there are actually exceeding the demand that we're experiencing. So I wouldn't want to give numbers in this forum because they can fluctuate and change, but we've got more places available in those settings than we've got demand for, whereas demand for our ASD provisions are increasing, and we need to look at being able to manage that and make sure we've got those places available. So we're keeping a track on those and those trends coming through. Similarly, around Welsh medium provision, we've discussed, creating a Welsh medium provision and looked at demand, but the demand actually coming through is less than what we are trying to provide. So we have to keep an eye on those figures constantly, because whilst we have a specialist placement process timescale, we also have to consider those requests throughout the year as and when they come in. It's not a cut-off point. A child could present with needs in February, and we still have to consider that application then. So we're trying to keep an eye on numbers, but also meet demand in year as well.
Jason?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to go back to the point Andrew made around the ALN funding formula and the changes that have taken place in the last 12 months on that. I think Andrew sold himself on the service short there because the size of the work or the volume of work that's gone into making that shift has been sizable. What's been really encouraging with that, though, is the involvement and the participation of the schools in the shift of that funding formula as well, and that acknowledgement of trying to shift that funding formula of shifting resource and service to the front end and to have that greater focus upon prevention. I think, you know, we're not going to see the fruits of that immediately, and that's going to be more of a long-term vision. But that falls nicely then with, I guess, as a council, how we're working with Marmot, the Marmot principles, and how we're trying to shift that line down to prevention as well. And it lines up quite nicely with the deal as well. I just wanted to reference that.
Thank you, Jason. Okay. Thank you. And question 9 is Councillor Keith.
Thank you, Chair. My question is in relation to paragraph 4.18, professional learning. It was reassuring for the members in the last 2 visits that we've done, both St Albans and Cross Keeliog, that the additional learning needs coordinating officers have found the ALN forums very, very beneficial. But one of the points that was communicated in the last visit was that the school was finding it challenging to allocate the time to attend these forums. So our concern, I suppose, is this an issue amongst the wider school community? And are you confident that best practice is being shared amongst all the LNN COs within our area?
From my experience of being in a Torvine school previously and being on the other side of it now, I think the Elenco forums in general, I would say it's not a wide issue, and perhaps it's something to look at with individual schools if that was the case. The forums are once every half term. The dates are given well in advance. At the end of one academic year, the whole dates of the following year are provided, and would really encourage that, you know, for the forums we promote to be the Elenco forums, that we welcome to have agenda items and points coming from them, and that we will try to feed that in throughout the year, as well as things that sort of we're promoting too. And so since I've been in post, we've only had one forum. We've got one next week, but the first forum was very well attended, with only a handful of schools who didn't attend due to there were apologies given and absence for illness and things like that. But usually we get a good representation from across the board. Anything that's been shared in terms of any presentations or any protocols and things like that, that's shared after to all ALNCOs, not just the ones that were present at the meetings. So, and again, I think we've got that relationship that if things need to be followed up, then it can be done as well.
Just wanted to say as well that, as Fiona said, we monitor attendance at those ALNCO forums, and they are very well attended. And it is usually just a handful that can't attend. We'll see next week because it's a busy time of year. But just as an example, we held an additional session in September, a professional learning session at Crown Bridge. And only around about half of ALNCOs were able to attend that one. So what we did was a mop-up session then at the following ALNCO forum. We sent out communication and said, we understand quite a few of you couldn't make this extra date. So if anyone wants to have that session again, we repeated it and offered it at the end of the ALNCO forum. The other thing that we do, I think, as Fiona said, in terms of communication, we give out those dates as early as we can in advance. And in the last academic year, we consulted with the ALNCOs and said, which day is best for you, what time is best for you, because often schools will plan their ALNCO release time days around the date that we have the meeting. So we explained they would always be on Wednesday afternoon at this time, so that schools can plan that non-contact in. And where we have other working groups that ALNCOs are often put forward for, like the EOTAS working group, the IBIS group, we actually provide ALN grant funding to support their release as well. So schools actually get money to release their staff to come to those groups. Sorry. And as part of the wider EAS school-to-school working, there is a whole plethora of professional learning that EAS provide or LACES provide. There's also a list of partner schools, for example, that schools can go onto their website, Sport in Our School's website. All of the schools are listed in terms of the partner support they can provide. So, for example, if I was a head teacher, I could go on and think, right, I'd like to send my staff to another school to look at good practice in literacy, and all of the schools that are offering that partner work are there for me to see, and I can broker that support through School Improvement Partner as head teacher. So there's that side of it as well to support school working.
That's funded.
And that is funded, yeah.
Well, it's great to know that, that it is monitored, and clearly if a school can't attend one session, well, you know, life happens. I think if it becomes obviously a pattern, then that'll be something obviously will be of attention, I think, to the members. So as a supplementary question, something which very much brought up now again from our last visit in Crossy-Ceiliog, is the area around replicating best practice of schools that have got totally different ALN needs. I mean, for example, we have a situation where in Crossy-Ceiliog School, for instance, they have an ALN need of perhaps one child in every 16, I think 6.8%. And where there are other schools in which have got a considerably higher level ALN needs, in where it can be 1 in 4, even 1 in 5 children. And my area would be, what are we doing, right? So we're comparing apples to apples, so we're sharing best practice among schools that are able to meet these challenges of you know, 1 in 5 or 1 in 4 children. Because we've not been to one of those, I've not been to one of those schools yet. And I think on our side, what can we do to give additional support to those schools that have got those additional challenges with an additional number of students that require those additional learning needs?
I think as part of the work we did with the EAS in developing the teaching and learning strategy and inclusive practice, there are a number of spotlights that we put into that strategy, and deliberately have chosen schools in varying contexts. So I've been a head teacher of 2 different schools. They were both completely different. So meeting the needs of your learners starts with knowing your context. So as you said, when we try to share examples of best practice, it's always with the caveat that this is what it looks like in this school. Some things can be universally transferred. It's not necessarily the strategy, but the principle around what you're trying to do. So I think we try to give variety of examples, and the inclusive practice spotlights that we've put in the strategy are from secondary schools and primary schools, some with high percentage of free school meals and ALN, and some with less. So we can give that, you know, variety of examples. But I think often what it comes down to is identifying the context, identifying what the need is, and how the school have responded appropriately, whatever that looks like, at whatever level. How did they fund it? How did they staff it? How are they making sure it's sustainable? So the inclusive practice spotlights follow the same format. Is that what was the issue? How did you know? What did you do about it? How are you going to make sure that it's sustainable and implemented, so that there's some learning that can be taken from the process as well as the what, if that makes sense.
Something there.
Thank you.
It's just coming back to what Claire said about looking at the cohort of your school as well, and that can actually vary year on year, and sometimes in year things have to be changed. So it's about sort of, and also coming back to the point about transition early, so making sure that transition is really timely, so you know the cohorts you've got coming in, because you may need to adapt practice and provision and systems within the school to meet the need of those changing cohorts that are coming through.
Yeah, well, as I myself was teaching 30 years ago in Lantanum School, and just took a year out. But the issue of ALM then wasn't something that was really on the radar, and it's been quite an education for me to see the impact and the increase in ALM. So thank you for that.
I go back further than you. I was teaching in Lanfrancford Grange Hospital before education. So there we go. Thank you for that, Councillor Keith. Question 11 is referring to 4.22. And have the reasons for the inconsistent use of EduKey been identified, and are you confident that this will be addressed? Has there been any early improvement around uptake? We mentioned this in a previous meeting.
Yeah, so I'll jump in there. EduKey is one of the work streams that I'm working on, and the working groups within that. So again, coming from a school, I knew that it was in a bit of uncertainty previously, and we're really keen to get all of our schools to a consistent point and moving forward. So we have delivered, first of all, got a working group from a number of representatives across school who, through their own self-evaluation, said they were really proficient and competent in using EduKey. we met a couple of times to devise a training session, a 2-hour training session, which incorporated a session of presentation and sharing, but then also a session of problem solving. So we wanted ALN codes to come and to be able to sort of problem solve and ask questions whilst they're using the programme in front of them. So the sessions that we had one whole day where we offered 3 sessions. They were very well attended, and we've had really, really positive feedback from ALN codes about it. I would say the sessions we've offered were a very initial baseline assessment of the basic functions of EduKey. But even within those sessions, some who were already using were able to pick up top tips and strategies and sharing. There were 3 schools who didn't attend, but have said they were confident in using it anyway. So that's absolutely fine. So apart from those 3, everybody else has already attended or have committed to a mop-up session that we're putting in January. So that's every school that we've targeted and hit with that. So we have, like I said, done this baseline training. We're going to then, as everyone's getting to grips with it a bit more, as a working group, we're going to devise another training session with perhaps the more sophisticated and trickier elements of use, and then we'll do the same again. And, you know, with the aim that everybody is using it consistently. We've really promoted that we would like schools to start with using EduKey to support transition, because it's such a beneficial tool to transfer that information. And just for a bit of a practical example, although at meetings and things, there's obviously always a transfer of things like IDPs and EP reports and things like that. But EduKey, you can transfer everything. So if schools are having meetings with parents, there's functions to store those logs, and that is so powerful to have that background being transferred. And, you know, just to see what was done before and see what wasn't done before, or either way. But it's really powerful to have that whole information about a child, that holistic view, being transferred to secondary schools. So we've promoted that if they're only on the very starting points, can they please start there? And also it's going to support our specialist placement processes as well. It's much more efficient in terms of workload. The idea being that the local authority can access school EduKey, and we can access the pupils folder. So schools won't have to submit and send information. It will all be signposted within that programme, and it's much more effective and efficient.
And one of the recommendations from our committee, I think. Very good. Thank you. Victoria.
Thank you, Chair. So we have touched upon this, Cleveland's part of this. This is in reference to 4.23. Is Welsh Medium ALN provision within Torfaen keeping pace with the increased demand? And what considerations have been given for the possibility of a Welsh Medium ALN learning resource base?
So we've moved on quite a bit since we last spoke about this in Scrutiny, and we are hoping to go out to consult in the new year, early in the new year, on the setting up of a new Welsh Medium ALN provision. What I would say, though, is the numbers that we've anticipated and planned for, we're not seeing the same level of demand coming through. We have already met with Welsh Medium head teachers and given them an indication that this was the direction of travel, so that it should not prevent them from referring to specialist panel. And they've been given that message: refer the children that you think need it, because in the past the message has been given that people are not referring because there's not somewhere to refer them into. So even though we've shared that message, that demand is still quite low. However, there is a demand, but it is the numbers are less than 10, for example. But what we have done is allocated funding to those schools specifically to support them with ALN provision, and they have been involved in supporting us to set up the consultation, if you like. Yeah.
Just so it requires a formal school organisation consultation. So we've identified a potential site for the provision to open in September. We just need to go to a statutory consultation at this point. So the intention is to open in September. The funding has been available this year, but as Claire said, the demand did not come through last year, so we've allocated the funding to schools rather than hosting a base that was empty.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It's in relation to the IBIS programme, and it's a question about how will the impact of the IBIS programme be measured and monitored.
Oh, is that word? Saying I've logged off, sorry. So IBIS was rolled out to our secondary schools, I think, a year before last, as a really robust and detailed programme from our senior educational psychologist. The role with our new advisor in secondary and post-16, that will be one of his work streams to really engage with schools to find out a number of things, really. A, have they used it so far? Have they got planning and is it on their action plans to use it? And if not, why not? We're very keen to roll out IBIS as a strategy, as part of a toolkit. You know, it's not the only way to support needs. We are promoting it as part of a toolkit and a strategy. And we are in the process at the minute to looking to evaluate what has been done with it so far and how useful our secondary schools have found it in terms of their professional learning, to then adjust that to see how we can roll that out to our primary schools as well. We've already had a primary school who has engaged in it and found it really beneficial, but we just want to really quality assure and check that that's applicable for our primary schools, and is there some sort of adjusting that we might need to do to roll it out to primaries.
And I think it's fair to say this is probably a work stream that is, it's not been paused, but has progressed as the same pace as, say, Autism and Education Trust and Educate, because the inclusive practice advisors are the ones that we want to run this. So in terms of how will we evaluate it, similarly with Educate, it'll be through questionnaires to the practitioners that have used it. It's only been with secondary schools so far, so it's easier to evaluate the impact, if you like, because we're just liaising with 6 schools. And what we can see is everyone is engaged in it, and the exclusions data is demonstrating a reduction in trend in secondary schools. It's difficult to conflate one with the other and say it's a direct result, but it will have helped. But as Fiona said, it's a tool in the toolkit, and because we're trying to develop that inclusive practice toolkit, we want to make sure that everything is aligned. And before we run ahead with something, rolling something out to primary schools, we wanted the 2 inclusive practice advisors to be in post together so they can plan this work stream and roll it out together, so we're not giving inconsistent messages across primaries and secondaries. So you should see that work pick back up now at pace from the spring term when those 2 people are in post. So the resource is still there, but it hasn't been rolled out wider yet for those reasons.
My question relates to paragraph 4.31. To what extent does the rise in behaviour, despite overall exclusions decreasing, almost half of primary schools have seen an increase in exclusions. Have the reasons for this been explored? If so, what were the trends?
And I think it's important to caveat that with that the numbers are still quite low. So whilst the trend is that they more than half have seen a rise, we're talking about a handful of exclusions in each of those settings. And in some instances, those exclusions are related to perhaps one learner who's then moved on to a more specialist provision. So in terms of us understanding those numbers, obviously we won't give details in this committee, but we do, as part of our wider group heat map, on a half-termly basis, we report as an education leadership team and wider colleagues, we look at the trends in permanent exclusions, fixed-term exclusions, and the correlation to modified days. And we know, for those 31 that I've mentioned there, we know who they are, we know why they happened, and we know what's been done about it and where that child or children may have moved on to. So there are some really specific reasons that are contributing to those numbers, where children I know have moved on to set-ins. But I also think it's where we've talked about the change in need, for example, in children coming into primary schools, and that is why we're seeing the need for the IBIS programme to be rolled out to primary schools, because we're seeing behaviours that perhaps traditionally wouldn't have been experienced in our year 5-6 learners. In our exclusions data analysis, we've identified a trend where year 5-6 learners are being excluded more than they were historically, and they're really key transition years. So it's about us, first of all, like you've said earlier, know your context, know who they are, and then before we report to wider group, we meet as a team, the ALN team, the inclusion team, the education psychology team, and the inclusive practice advisors will be part of that now moving forward from January, where we sit down and we say, okay, in this school there's been X number of exclusions that involved this number of learners. Were they male, were they female, which year groups were they in? And the role of the inclusive practice advisor will be to go back to those schools then, following that piece of half-termly data analysis, to say, what support do you need? Is there anything further we can be doing? You know, and trying to triangulate also to things like physical handling incidents. Is that learner also the learner that's needing RPI, for example? Is there been violence in work incidents? So it's a real triangulation of information. So it isn't a good trend, but I think it's putting it into perspective as well, isn't it?
Yeah. What would be really helpful if all governors were regularly questioning about violence at work, exclusions, around restrictive physical interventions, have teachers reported those back to the local authority. We've had some indications lately that events might have happened in school that have not been reported to us. So that's an ask, basically. We are promoting that with all governors, but I think that would be really helpful if all elected members could do that.
And the other thing to say is anecdotally, I haven't got numbers to present to you, but we are seeing an increase sometimes in children coming into Torfaen from other local authorities, coming into our schools, sometimes from England, so they've come with an ECHP or not, and the school is having to start the graduated response. So some of these exclusions will relate to children that are fairly new to the school, that the school have taken as an in-year transfer, for example, as well.
Thank you. Question 15 is referring to 4.31, and it continues from the previous discussion. To what extent does the rise in behaviour issues and exclusions within almost half of the primary schools indicate the need for a primary PRU within Torfaen? Members noted that this was mentioned as a risk in paragraph 6.1, and it would be kept under review.
Okay. The expansion of the PRU is on the capital work scheme. It's something we're continually monitoring. Beyond that, nothing I can really say at this point. We have the expansion in specialist places. We've put the funding more into primary to support mainstream ALN learners. If there is a need, clearly we will progress that, but it's just something we're monitoring at the moment.
One thing that we have done to try to support is reviewed the Pontfach referral process. So Fiona has led on that particular piece of work, because the premise of Pontfach was that it would be an assessment centre, a turnaround provision. And there have been some children who've stayed in Pontfach a bit longer than that turnaround provision period of time. So that protocol has been reviewed to make sure it is in line with the PRU protocol for turnaround provision. And that's been relaunched with our schools this term now, so that it's really clear what the process for referring into that provision is, and the expectations for children reintegrating and returning to school, that those expectations are really clear as well.
I was just going to add that within the process of Pontfach is that there is a really robust element of professional learning as well. So the idea being that children are supported with members of staff on their schools, and that they then go back to schools and have the skills and knowledge to support that learning in school, but then hopefully support a wider range of learners in the school as well, because they've had the communication and liaison with Pontfach staff to sort of provide the skill that they need to do that.
Thank you, Chair. So, ongoing theme, my question relates to 4.33, and it is noted that 74% of all children looked after were excluded in 24-25 and they received more than one exclusion, indicating a persistent challenge for this small cohort of pupils. How will this be ongoingly monitored, and what challenges have been identified that need to be overcome?
I've just drafted a briefing for governors, which will go out in January, around exclusions. And one of the things that we're asking school governors to really be aware of and mindful of is supporting and challenging school leaderships around exclusions, ensuring that they have accurate data, not just about the numbers of exclusions, but the groups of pupils that are being excluded and the reasons why. Because, for example, we are seeing this trend, and we need governors to be aware and asking the schools directly what support is being put in place. All schools get an element of PDG CLAR funding, for example, so it links to questions around how is that funding being used to support the learner of all avenues being tried. I mean, obviously we know that because we're analysing our data really, really well. So in terms of the monitoring, I think it comes back to the heat map conversation that we just had. At every check-in point of data analysis, we're looking at who those learners are. Are they EFSM? Are they ALN? Are they CLAR? So we can provide that bespoke support to the schools. And we are seeing an increase in I mentioned it just now, learners sometimes coming into schools from outside of the borough who are CLAR. So sometimes this is happening because that learner has just arrived in the school and perhaps those relationships have not been established and so on. So it's trying to support schools when those emergency situations happen as well, and recognising that sometimes it is quite challenging for the school to put something in place really, really quickly for a learner that they might have only had in place for a week or two. So we're trying to respond to that changing need at the moment.
Jason?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I was going to. I mean, obviously, there's an overall decrease in looking at the children looked after population. There's an overall decrease there. One of the things is that's great for me in terms of our overall directorate is we're able to join the dots up here now, both from an education and from a social care point of view, which hitherto, 3-4 years ago, we wouldn't have been joining those dots up. So there's a lot of collaborative work then that's done across between social care and education with those children looked after. I mean, what we see in terms of the 74% who receive more than one exclusion, they will be those children, I guess, within that education setting who have the highest level or higher levels of complexity and need as well. So again, our ability to join the dots up and join the services up between social care and education can only look to improve that going forward.
Andrew?
Sorry, I just got thrown. Something we're working on at the moment is the rollout of an electronic PEP, personal education plan for looked after children. So that's been a joint project across the ALN team and children's services. And that's due to go live, I think, in January. And that will really aid the process, similar to EduKey, actually, just having one online record that school staff can feed into, the ALN team can feed into, and the social worker. Because it is about that individual targeted wraparound support for those learners. We recognise the paper process we've had at the moment is not efficient. So that's why we've worked over the last year to develop this electronic programme. And like I say, its launch is imminent.
I was going to mention the Children and Families Conference that we had recently as well, because I think one of the ways of monitoring and addressing this is to build that understanding of the impact of an exclusion for a CLAR learner or a learner from any vulnerable group. So at the Children and Families Conference that was held in November, which was attended by all head teachers and children and family staff, a number of the presentations were on outcomes for vulnerable groups and the impact of things like exclusion, low attendance and so on. So where a permanent exclusion is being discussed, for example, we would always encourage schools to phone us as an ALN team, discuss the reasons why they're considering that for any learner, but particularly for groups of vulnerable learners, looking at what the alternatives are, what additional strategies or support could be put in place, so the schools understand the impact that it can have on these groups of pupils.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a supplementary on that. Looking at the CLAR pupils and the ALM pupils, when they come across from other authorities, do we get the paperwork and all the information on them quite quickly so that we're, obviously able to put stuff in place for them, or do we get the child before we get all that information?
It varies depending on where they come from.
That's where the consistency came in as well, of forms from other local authorities and primary. So the electronic form needs to be right first time rather than having to change it later in the day with consistency, I think.
Yeah, and I think some of those pupils are coming from England as well, where there's a different legislative system, so yeah, that's a challenge.
Thank you. Question 17. Councillor Thomas.
The question also refers to 4.33. The report confirms that exclusions for young carers has increased by 7% since 2024. How is this being addressed, and is there good liaison in place between social workers and obviously the relevant partners?
Jason, did you want to come in?
I think that there is good liaison between social workers and schools. What I would say is not all young carers that are identified within the school setting will be identified within social care as well. So there may be some young carers where there isn't that join up, because some young carers' families may want to be identified within schools as young carers, but may not want a service from social care, which is their right. So where we would be aware of those young carers from a social care point of view, where there will be that join up. Where we wouldn't be aware of, though, that join up may not be as consistent. So that's something, I guess, that's something I'd be keen for us to look at further in terms of that 7%, is to analyse that figure a little bit more, to look at where there is that join up. So it's a bit of a vague answer at the moment, because I think there will be that difference between what social care are providing and what schools are providing or identifying as young carers.
One thing I would say as well, in terms of the link inclusion officer, so every school is allocated a link inclusion officer. In the team, we have 2 of those that are there specifically for CLAR pupils. Not all young carers will be CLAR pupils, but often there is an overlap. So wherever a pupil is excluded from a vulnerable group, whatever that vulnerable group might be, the link inclusion officer would also go back to the school. So in the example of a CLAR pupil, our 2 link inclusion officers specifically for CLAR would support and challenge schools around those. And it would be the same for young carers. But as Jason said, it's making sure we've got that information about who those young carers are to be able to provide that robust challenge.
Thank you. Next question is question 18. Councillor Mark Jones.
This is relevant to paragraph 4.34, which states that the twice yearly meetings with the secondary school senior leadership teams and the LA are helping to develop a better understanding of individual schools' provision systems and context, identifying professional learning needs and key themes for supporting the needs of pupils with social and emotional and behavioural difficulties. Are you confident that these twice yearly meetings are sufficient for the wide range of work?
I think the point we made earlier about the inclusive practice advisors taking on this work is linked to this paragraph. So historically this was done by a member of the educational psychology team who's since retired, and when we analyse that work stream, it doesn't require the specialism of an educational psychologist to be doing this work. It is much more around that inclusive practice. So those biannual meetings, they have been effective to date, but what we've identified through our wider group heat map of schools is there are some schools that need more support than others. So our plan moving forward is to provide that support in a more bespoke way, so there will be a universal offer for everybody. But there might be some schools that don't need 2 meetings a year. It might be if their exclusions are very, very low, that annual check-in is enough, and that resource can be diverted more to a termly meeting for those schools where exclusions are higher. So in answer to the question, I think what you'll see is that the universal offer will change, and there'll be more of a bespoke offer for those where we need to target support.
Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Coles, question 19.
Thank you, Chair. This is in relation to the table at 4.35. So although the total number of modified days decreased during 2024-25, there was a slight increase in the new modified days from 95 to 105. And is this an area of concern?
Again, one of the things we do through our data analysis is try to monitor the correlation between exclusions and modified days. Because, you know, to be really clear, we don't want any children not attending school full time, but also we're realists in that for some children that is absolutely necessary to reintegrate them into school. We don't advocate the use of modified days as an alternative to exclusion, but they sometimes can help reduce the risk of. So we have a really robust process around modified days. Any child on a modified day has a PSP, a personal plan. That process has been audited and has been found to be really robust. So one of our members of the inclusion team monitors those PSPs. They're done every 6 weeks. So there's no child staying on a modified day for an extended period of time without a regular check-in. So whilst they've increased, as in year, the number of new ones started, they've all been appropriate.
We took Eston in yesterday for our termly link visit, and this was something we talked about with them, and including the use of modified days for reintegrating children who have been on elective home education or potentially not been attending because of anxiety. So, we also talked about Westmont have quite a number of modified days, but they're used really appropriately for specific learners, and that we would much rather have the learners in part of the day than not at all. But as Claire said, is that really close monitoring. Ideally, we would have none, but I would rather have a modified day than a child excluded or just not attending at all.
Jane, will you take question 20 and 21?
Yes, well, thank you. Yeah, and I think I'll combine these questions. So, moving on to paragraph 4.37 through to 4.39. Can you please provide an update on the service supplied by the Outreach Service? And are you confident that the Outreach Service are able to meet the increasing demand around complex behavioural and emotional issues being presented within schools at the moment?
Yeah, so again, there's a really robust referral en route to outreach, and the referrals are really discussed in depth, looking particularly at that graduated response and almost sort of triangulating that schools, you know, have done all that they can, and to the point of requiring the support of outreach. I think the role of the inclusive practice advisors will only supplement and support that and make sure that the referrals that are going through to outreach are, so that, you know, those very top ones, the most complex needs, where there's some that hands-on intervention and support required, and the role of the inclusive practice advisors will support that. And then, like I said, Pontbark works in collaboration with outreach, I suppose. Pontbark is the next tier to outreach. So I really think that there is a clear, almost a local authority graduated response to supporting the needs of children in the local authority.
And outreach will they'll problem solve with schools, as Fiona said. Sometimes support workers will go directly into the school and work with the child. Sometimes they might go in and work with the staff and provide professional learning. But schools, and I understand why, are going to outreach because we haven't had that advisory team before then. So there are probably some cases that outreach is supporting with that could be dealt with at a less escalated level currently.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Thomas, question 22.
How is the new ALN system being monitored, particularly in terms of gathering the views of schools, pupils and parents?
So do you mean the implementation of the new ALN system? So obviously we've fully implemented since September. So part of that, for example, has been making sure that all statements are moved over to IDPs, so parents would be fully involved in that process through PCP, person-centred planning, meetings along the way, and we are fully compliant. We've moved all of those over. I think it's things like we've talked about before, the self-evaluation, the surveys and so on that we do with schools and head teachers. And also Welsh Government are undertaking a legislative review of ALN, so there's been a number of surveys and consultations as part of that. There's just recently been a parent and carer toolkit developed by the Welsh Government, for example, in relation to ALN. Sorry, can you repeat the question? Because I think I...
So as part of the process, pupil voices and family voice is key through IDPs. So that was part of the purpose of the legislation, was to embed learner voice right from the start. So that's an ongoing issue. In terms of measuring it, one thing we look at is tribunal rates, and where there's a dissatisfaction with the process that we've operated. We've had very low tribunal rates to date. But parents will not always be satisfied, and they have that right to go to tribunal. But we feel that we have a really comprehensive and fair process, and we can't discuss the outcomes of tribunals. That's not how the system works. But we're really satisfied with the outcomes and the rates of outcomes that we've received. I think we had maybe five tribunals, and some of the local authorities were talking tens of tribunals that have taken place each year. So that's an indication that it's an appropriate process we're running.
Anything that we've learned then from the feedback that we've had?
I think an example of where we've taken feedback is after the specialist placement process last year, we didn't do a formal consultation with parents, but where we had dissatisfied parents or ETW, some didn't progress all the way to Education Tribunal Wales, because actually we met with parents, myself and Fiona have met with a number of parents, as is the ALN manager, where we sit down, we listen to their experiences of the process. Sometimes the decision has been correct, but the parents have got a valid point in how they felt, how they were communicated with, how they didn't fully understand what was being said. So we've met and we've listened, and we've changed the specialist placement process as a result of that feedback. That's why the decisions are being made earlier this year, and that decision making has been brought back to February rather than the end of March, because that allows us to make those decisions in a more timely manner, communicate the outcome to parents in a more timely manner. So that's an example of where we listen and we've made a change.
Claire spoke to all heads yesterday about parental expectations, about how we can skill up school staff to have difficult conversations with parents, particularly about when submitting applications for specialist placements, when the child will not have them. So as an example, we had an application for a specialist place where an IDP had been written the day before, so no graduated response had taken place. So that would absolutely lead to no placement being offered, but then the parent would still have the right to go to a tribunal, it takes their time, it's their stress. It removes officer time from supporting the school to meet the needs of learners. So one thing we want to do is to work more closely with schools about how to manage parental expectations, and also to make sure the schools are putting in those graduated responses, so you're not setting up false expectation. Yeah.
Just to pick up on the pupil voice element a bit as well, I think through specialist processes, we always really consider sort of what does the pupil want in this, what's their views, especially at a secondary level, and thoughts and wishes, but also as well on sharing best practice. So obviously, Kwesa Cilio just had their inspection and had a spotlight about pupil voice within there and how they gather views and opinions of individuals. So we're really keen to share that with all of our schools as really good practice, because they've had really good impact from that and really seen the benefit of it. So, you know, just sharing that practice around the most person-centred approaches within our schools.
We really value the additional resource that's been put into education this year, both to expand specialist places and to have the additional advisory staff, which we hope will stem the requirement. But like we said, there are still significant numbers of specialist requests coming through that potentially will require further specialist provisions to be put in place. So again, Welsh Government have recognised this and they provide local authorities with ALM grants, and again, that's been significant amounts this year, which again has helped us to balance budget and plan for the future. But it remains a risk because of the demands that are coming through. We feel we've got the right policy, but it will take time to embed.
And one thing I would highlight is, you know, there are really big numbers in news briefings and in the press and in desk newsletters, millions of pounds for ALN, but it's also highlighting the challenge of that when it's grant funding, because as head of service, to try to plan for sustainable change, I've got to spend my grant by the end of March, and so that can sometimes create the impression that there is a huge amount of money floating around in terms of ALN, and there is, but in terms of trying to plan sustainable and plan for longevity, that's quite a challenge sometimes. So I think we've highlighted quite a lot of risk areas. We're aware of them, and for me it is things like ensuring we've got that triage helpline type approach for our schools, so that we've got that problem solving forum, and forecasting need really well, using data really well, really robustly, being intelligent, trying to scan the horizon, see what's coming up, so we're not hit with surprises. Andrew's mentioned elective home education already. We know that that is a challenge for us in this local authority in terms of high numbers. And whilst that's not strictly about ALN, it is having an impact on the ALN and inclusion team, where sometimes we're seeing children who are returning to school and parents are asking for support with gaps in learning, for example. So we're not going to sit around and wait to see what that looks like in a couple of years. We're already trying to preempt and forecast what increased demand and need might look like. So yeah, we're always going to need that core staffing around that advisory support, and as Andrew said, look at things like primary provision and provide that really robust evidence and information to you if we're saying we need more provision that is coming from an informed place. We're not sticking our finger in the wind and guessing at what we might need.
Thank you very much. Jason or Richard, do you have any final comments to make before I ask for recommendations?
Nothing from me, thank you, Chair.
So I was going to say, what if I could put my mic on? There we go. It wasn't working, but here we are. I think Claire alluded to the fact that I get briefed on this regularly, and my second tranche of going around to primary schools and secondary schools, it's on the top of heads' agendas. But what they do say, and what's clear from the information you've been given today, and the important word in the agenda being transformation, I think the distance we've travelled in the last 12 months on this has absolutely been remarkable. And it's down to the people around the table, whether they're new or so many months in post, or I guess you're long in the tooth now, Andrew. It's still relatively new to Torvine, but I think it's down to them, their perseverance, and the schools, and working with the schools for the betterment of the pupils. So I'm very pleased with the report and your questioning, and I hope you're assured by the responses you've received this morning.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. I think we'll find difficulty in finding any recommendations because everything seems to be working well and looking certainly improved from where we've come from. So that leaves me to thank the executive member and officers for their time and contributions to the meeting and ask if they'd like to leave. So we're able to actually discuss whether we can find any recommendations or not. No, there we go.
Thank you, members.
Goodbye all. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. May I remind members that we're being asked to hang on. May I remind members that the meeting is still formal proceedings and still being webcast. And we've been asked the Scrutiny Committee to consider when coming up with their recommendations, which I think will be quite difficult this morning, but members have been invited to assess whether the relevant ALM policies have had a positive impact on learners' outcomes and behaviours and well-being, determine whether the provision is in place for sufficient and in order to meet the current and future needs of demand, and provide recommendations to the Executive Member for Children, Families and Education on the areas for improvement or development in our strategic approach to ALN. Members have any specific recommendations that they would like to make on the report? Victoria.
I do have one, and it is just about the post-16 provision, although it's in its early stages. Something that we can continue to monitor. That was it from me.
I think there might be another one come out of the last question about the grant funding. But that might not go, well, it might go to the executive member, but to go to the Welsh Government, I think.
To liaise with
the Welsh Government on actually not grant funding. We need core funding for this specific piece of work because staffing needs to be in place to actually fulfil the plans. So, and I think the need for forecasting as well, because that was mentioned, you know, there's data there that we know what's coming through from health and what have you, that needs to be robust in knowing what we're expecting in our schools. So, and particularly the ALTIS as well. I don't know whether we can conclude that because there's gaps in learning with EOTIS returners coming in. That was mentioned at the last, but it's not within our remit, it's within the funding remit of the Welsh Government and the grant funding. Any other comments?
Could we make a comment about how robust the implementation has been, the planning, and we've seen from our reports the success of the implementation of the ALN transition?
Was there something on question 5, the cluster plans?
an action, that one.
Oh, it was an action, yeah.
Just on question 5, they mentioned a report. I think that the EAS were currently compiling around cluster work. I don't think it's going to be ready for a little while, but obviously it might sit on your action sheet for a few meetings. But if you want me to add that onto there, then obviously you can receive that once it's ready.
Yeah, that would be useful. Yeah. Any other comments from members? No. Councillor Jones, are you okay?
Yeah, all fine, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That takes us then to, do you want to recap on what we've picked up, Geraint, before I go on to the next agenda?
Yeah, if you like, Chair. Yeah, so obviously to continue to monitor, although you appreciate it's early stages, continue to monitor the situation around the post-16 provision. For the exec member to liaise with Welsh Government around the risks around the grant funding for ALN. The need for robust forecasting, a comment regarding how the ALN transition has had robust planning and implementation, so basically praise on that front, and the action around the cluster report from the EAS for question 5.
Okay. We all happy with those recommendations? Good, thank you very much everyone. So we'll go to agenda item number 6, which is the item for the next meeting. Geraint, can you please take us through this item, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, usual report you're all used to now. Basically, as you can see on there, your next meeting, you're scheduled on the 12th of Feb to look at the LA School Improvement Service and the summer outcomes. The officers and the exec member, nobody's raised any issues around having that or anything coming forward that you may want to consider instead of that. And looking at the appendices, obviously with Appendix 2 and 3, there's nothing that jumps out there that would take suggest it would take precedent over that. So just basically looking for your confirmation that you're happy for that, and if so, this afternoon I will share the draft pro forma with you and hopefully get the final version to officers early next week once you've had a few days to consider that.
Brilliant. Are we all happy with that?
Yeah.
Brilliant. Good. Thank you. That takes us to the date and time of the next meeting, which is the 12th of February 2026, the new year. As the chair of this committee, may I thank members and officers for their ongoing support and contributions to our meeting, and it just takes this opportunity to wish everyone a very happy Christmas and a healthy, prosperous new year. And I'm off to Lanzarote. Bye. Thank you all.